Ever stop to wonder why it seems like kids go through a phase of telling, well, tall tales,
Uh-huh.
and how even we adults who mostly, try to be honest, sometimes find ourselves bending the truth a bit.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Hmm.
Today we're digging into that, the whole world of lying. It's sometimes a bit unsettling, actually.
It really is. And we've got two really interesting pieces of research to guide us. First, there's a study, it's from Frontiers in Psychology, that basically put kids in a spot where they could lie and looked at how that connected to their behavior.
Okay.
And then we'll look at a paper from the Journal of Marketing Research. It's more theoretical, but it explores the mental gymnastics, you could say, that we adults do.
Mental gymnastics.
Yeah, to sort of stay honest in our own eyes, even when maybe we're not being entirely truthful.
Right. So our mission today is to kind of unravel these complexities, from those early childhood fibs right through to the really subtle ways we justify our own, maybe little white lies as grown-ups.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump in. Let's start with the science behind why kids lie. What can that tell us about their development?
Right. So this study in Frontiers in Psychology, it was really trying to get past just knowing there's some link, a correlation between kids lying and, maybe aggression or problems at school.
Because usually that's just based on what parents or teachers say.
Yeah.
Which can be biased.
Precisely. That relies on reports, which aren't always objective. So this study wanted to get a more direct experimental look at the lying behavior itself.
Okay, so how did they actually do that? How do you observe kids lying in a controlled setting? It sounds tricky.
It was quite clever, actually. They had 275 kids aged between 9 and 11. And the main part was this game.
A game?
Yeah, a number guessing game. Each kid picked a secret number, 1 to 6. Then they rolled a die. All they had to do was say if their secret number matched the number on the die. And here's the catch. Every time they reported a match, they got a token, a reward.
I see where this is going.
Right. It creates this temptation. Lie a little, get a reward. And the researchers wouldn't know for sure on any single roll if the kid was telling the truth.
Because the number was secret.
Exactly. But statistically, if everyone was honest, you'd only expect about, 1 match in 6 rolls?
Makes sense. So a little nudge towards dishonesty. What did they find? Did the kids go for the extra tokens?
Well, yeah. On average, the kids reported about 2.58 matches.
Wow. Okay. So quite a bit higher than the one you'd expect from just chance.
Definitely. It strongly suggests that, as a group, they were lying to get more tokens, but they also found something interesting about age.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
The older kids in the study, the 10 and 11-year-olds, were actually less likely to lie in this game.
Really? That's counterintuitive, isn't it? You might think older kids would be, better at it or more strategic.
That's what you might assume, yeah. But here, in this specific setup, the frequency of reported matches actually went down with age. But then, this is where it gets really interesting. They looked at the connection between how much a child lied in the game and any behavioral issues reported by their teachers.
Using something like a standard questionnaire.
Yeah, the Rudder Children Behavior Questionnaire. Teachers filled it out, rating things like antisocial behaviors, neurotic tendencies, that kind of stuff at school.
Okay, and was there a link? Did the kids who fibbed more also have more reported issues?
Yes, they found a positive correlation. So kids reporting more matches, likely lying more for rewards, also tended to have higher scores for behavior problems.
Okay, that kind of fits with general expectations, maybe.
Yeah.
But you said it got really interesting.
Right, because the strength of that connection, that correlation between lying and behavior problems, it changed depending on the child's age.
It changed.
How so? Well, for the youngest kids in the study, the 6 and 7-year-olds, the link wasn't statistically significant. There wasn't a strong pattern.
Okay.
But for the 8 and 9-year-olds, and even more so for the 10 and 11-year-olds, that relationship became much stronger, much more significant.
Wow.
Yeah, if you pictured it on a graph, the line showing that connection gets steeper for the older kids. A stronger positive trend.
So it's not just that they're linked, but the link itself seems to kind of solidify or become more pronounced as kids get older. Why would that be? Did the researchers have ideas about that?
They offered a few potential explanations. One idea is that kids who already have more behavior issues might just perceive the world differently. Maybe they think lying is more common, so it feels more okay for them to do it too.
Like everyone else does it.
Sort of, yeah. Another thought is about self-control. Lying in this kind of temptation scenario might reflect poorer self-control, and we know that's linked to behavior problems generally.
That makes sense. Resisting that little reward takes some control.
Exactly. And for the older kids who are still lying quite a bit in this game, well, it might suggest a delay in developing their moral compass, their moral consciousness, and that impulse control.
So, still acting more like a younger child might in that situation. Were there limitations to this study we should bear in mind?
Oh, definitely. They always point those out. For one, the game design meant they couldn't know if a lie happened on a specific trial, just the overall trend.
Right.
Also, correlation isn't causation. Does lying lead to behavior problems, or do kids with problems tend to lie more? This study can't definitively answer that.
The chicken and egg problem.
Pretty much. And they also noted, the limits of teacher reports, and they didn't dig into different types of behavior problems or look at other cognitive skills like, say, executive functions or theory of mind, understanding others' perspectives, which could also play a role.
Got it. So it's a really valuable piece, giving some solid experimental evidence for that link, especially the age part, but there's still more to figure out about the why and the direction of influence.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that gives us a clearer picture of lying in childhood. Now, let's shift gears. Let's talk about us, adults. How does research explain how people who mostly see themselves as honest can, well, still be dishonest sometimes?
Yeah, this brings us to this really interesting theory called self-concept maintenance. It's explored in that Journal of Marketing research paper. The core idea is pretty intuitive, actually.
Okay.
We all generally want to think of ourselves as good, honest people, right? That's part of our self-image, our self-concept.
Sure. I think most people do.
But we also face situations all the time where we could gain something, maybe save time, save effort, get a small advantage by being just a little bit dishonest.
Right. The temptation is still there.
Exactly. And this theory suggests we navigate this tension. We often manage to engage in small acts of dishonesty, but crucially, we do it in a way that doesn't force us to update our self-image. We don't suddenly think, oh, I'm a dishonest person.
So we kind of protect our view of ourselves.
Yeah.
We cheat a little, but not enough to feel like a cheater.
That's basically it. And a key mechanism for this is something the researchers call categorization.
Categorization.
Yeah, how we label or think about our actions. We can reinterpret slightly dishonest things in ways that make them seem less bad or even acceptable, especially if the action itself is kind of ambiguous or, as they say, malleable.
Malleable, like flexible in how you define it.
Exactly. Think about, say, taking a pencil from work versus taking cash from the petty cash box.
Okay, yeah, very different feel.
Right. Taking the pencil feels easier to rationalize. They have loads. It's a part of the office supplies, whatever. Taking cash feels much more like straightforward stealing. The pencil scenario has more categorization malleability.
I see. The lines are blurrier.
Precisely. And the theory goes, the more malleable the situation, the more dishonesty people might engage in without it negatively impacting their self-concept.
So it's all about that internal justification. What specific hypotheses did the paper explore around this?
They had a few key ones. First, that dishonesty would increase if our attention to our own moral standards decreases. Like if we're not actively thinking about being honest.
Okay, makes sense.
Second, that dishonesty increases when that categorization malleability goes up when it's easier to rationalize.
Right, like the pencil example.
And the big overarching idea. People will be dishonest, but only up to a certain point. Up to a level that doesn't force them to think of themselves as dishonest. There's a kind of internal threshold.
Fascinating. And they tested these ideas with experiments.
They did some really clever ones.
Tell us about one or two.
Okay, well, one really striking one looked at moral reminders. They had participants do a task, solving puzzles for money, where they could cheat on their score. Just before the task, one group was asked to recall the 10 Commandments. Another group recalled 10 books they'd read.
A moral prime versus a neutral one?
Exactly. And the result, the group that recalled the 10 Commandments reported solving significantly fewer matrices dishonestly.
Wow, just thinking about a moral code made them more honest.
It seems so. But what's also key is that even in the control group, the book group, the level of cheating wasn't like off the charts. It was limited. People cheated a bit, but not as much as they potentially could have.
Which supports that idea of self-concept maintenance. They stopped before feeling too bad.
That's the interpretation, yes. It hints they were holding back to preserve that self-image.
Okay, what's another one that stood out?
Another one looked at the medium of exchange, how you get the reward. In one condition, people got paid directly in cash for supposedly solving puzzles.
Right.
In another, they got tokens for each solved puzzle, which they then immediately traded in for cash.
Just one extra step.
Just one step. But the people getting tokens were more dishonest. They claimed to solve more puzzles than the direct cash group.
Why would that be?
The researchers argue the tokens acted as a buffer. They increased that categorization malleability. Cheating for a token feels slightly less like cheating for money, even if it's immediately exchanged. It distances the act from the monetary gain just enough.
That's subtle, but makes sense. It creates a little psychological distance. Did they look at how people felt about themselves after these acts?
Yes. In another experiment, people did a task where they could cheat. It involved recycling money versus taking it directly, another malleability thing. Afterwards, they were asked to predict their performance on a second, uncheatable task.
Okay.
The cheaters didn't predict they'd do worse on the second task than the honest people did. And crucially, they also didn't rate themselves as less honest overall.
So even though they knew they'd cheated.
They didn't seem to internalize it. They didn't update their self-assessment or their performance expectations based on that dishonest act. It supports the idea they were aware, but compartmentalizing.
Putting it in that separate box, like we said. Did they rule out other explanations? Like maybe people just cheat because they think others do or they're scared of getting caught?
They looked into that. They ran experiments where they manipulated people's beliefs about how much others were cheating, and it didn't significantly change this kind of self-concept-driven cheating. And they even had a condition where cheating was super easy, shredding your own answer sheet, paying yourself from a jar, maximum opportunity, minimal risk.
And did everyone just cheat massively then?
No. Cheating went up compared to lower opportunity conditions, but it was still limited. People didn't just take all the money. Again, it suggests this internal boundary related to self-concept was more powerful than just the external risk or opportunity.
So the big picture from these studies seems to be that our own desire to see ourselves as good, honest people is a really powerful regulator of our behavior.
Yeah.
Maybe even more so than worrying about getting caught, at least for these small-scale dishonesties.
Exactly. We cheat when we can, but often only up to that internal limit where we can still feel good about ourselves.
And the implication is kind of worrying, isn't it? That
Yeah.
maybe the total cost of all these little widespread self-justified dishonest acts could be huge.
That's what the authors suggest, yeah. It might actually add up to more damage than the big, dramatic cases of fraud we hear about just because it's so common.
So dealing with dishonesty isn't just about stricter rules or punishments.
Probably not entirely. It also involves understanding these psychological factors, like making moral standards salient or reducing that room for rationalization.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. We've looked at children's lying, how it links to development and behavior, and then these subtle ways adults manage their own honesty. What's the main thread connecting these two areas?
I think it's really about the complex interplay between our actions, our motivations, whether it's tangible rewards for kids or preserving self-image for adults, and our understanding of right and wrong.
Yeah?
The kids' study shows that understanding and the related self-control developing over time. The adult research shows the sophisticated, almost unconscious strategies we use later in life to navigate those same kinds of moral tensions.
It's like we're always doing this balancing act, isn't it, between what we want and our need to feel like a decent person from childhood onwards.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's a final thought for us to chew on? Something to really consider.
Maybe think about your own life, or just society more broadly. Where might that categorization malleability, that flexibility in how we frame things be operating today? What are the modern versions of, say, taking office supplies or claiming slightly more on expenses, the pencils of our world?
Things that seem minor, maybe harmless.
Exactly, the things we rationalize easily. What are those gray areas, and what does acknowledging them mean for how we try to raise honest kids or build more ethical workplaces or just navigate our own lives? What are those seemingly small things we might need to look at a bit more closely?